Location, location, location. Choosing the right location for your garden is literally everything. It can make or break your entire garden. So it's really important that as we're designing our garden, we choose the right location and we design it right the first time. Let me show you how I chose this location for my garden and all the steps and things that I did when it came to planning out my garden before I ever put my shovel to the ground. As you might imagine, the most important part of planning your garden and choosing the right location for your garden is choosing a spot that gets enough sun. Sun is going to be the biggest factor. It's going to be the most important priority. Most of your plants are going to need a minimum of 6 hours of sunlight per day, and that's direct sunlight, not sunlight that's dappled or like through a tree or partially shaded. We're talking direct sun, and 6 hours is really the minimum for most plants. They really like 8 to 12 hours of sun per day. So choosing a spot that gets a lot of sun exposure throughout the day is going to be your first priority. It's going to be your main priority, and everything else comes after that. A really good way to do this is when you've identified a spot that you want to put your garden in, go out several times throughout the day and check the position of the sun throughout the day. Check how the shadows fall and what areas might be shaded, what areas might have a lot of sun. If you were to put a trellis in that area, how would the shadows fall? You can tell this by just kind of walking through that space and seeing how your shadow falls in that garden area. That's the first thing I did when it came to choosing this location. I came out several times throughout the first day and a few times throughout the next couple of days for an entire week to really determine how the sun hits this area, so that I got a really good idea of, once I had plants thriving in here, how much sun were they going to get, but also how to plant, let's say, my taller vegetables, how I plant those in relation to the shorter vegetables, where I put my trellis. So where I put my trellis, I wanted to be able to put it in a space that's not going to shade out the rest of the bed, and I did this by going out and checking the position of the sun. So then I knew exactly where to put my trellis in the bed so that the shadows would fall outside the bed. This is really important. Like I said, sun is your first and main priority. Not only how much sun does the space that you're planting in get, that's first, but then also how the shadows fall within that space. A lot of people use those sun tracker apps. That might be helpful. I've never used them. What I found is just literally going outside and checking that area is what's most beneficial to me, and it helps me really visualize the garden. Also, you can use a compass. I actually have one on my phone that kind of helps me, and try to orient your garden facing south. This is going to give you better sun exposure. It's also going to give you a little bit more protection for things like wind and things like that, or so they say. If you can only face your garden east and west, it's not going to be a deal breaker. It's not going to be the end of the world if that's what you have to do. But facing it north to south is a better option if you can. The next thing you want to notate when it comes to the area that you've planned for your garden is what type of soil you have here. Now, this is not a deal breaker because you can use raised beds, you can use amendments and things like that. But it's a good practice, especially if you want to grow in ground, to be acquainted with the type of soil that is in that space. You want to know if you're going to deal with compaction, if you have heavy clay soil. You want to see how water pools in that area. You want to see if there's standing water after rain in that area. That can tell you how well draining or not well draining that space is. You're going to want to find out if there's a lot of sand, because if there's a lot of sand, whatever nutrients and amendments you add to the soil could be leached out pretty quickly. Also, you may have to water more frequently. So getting acquainted with the type of soil that is in that area is very important, especially if you're going to grow in ground. Now, if you're going to use something like a raised bed, which is what I'm doing here, there's a lot of benefits to raised beds, by the way, but specifically when we're talking about choosing the right location, is utilizing a raised bed. You don't have to worry about the soil quality as much because you're going to add your own soil into that raised bed, and you're going to make it the perfect medium for your plants to grow in. However, if the native soil is compacted and doesn't drain very well and you put a raised bed on top of that, you may still wind up with drainage issues. So it's something to keep in mind when you're planning your garden. Another desirable location for your garden is going to be one that's flat. Now, this might sound kind of common sense, but I have actually planted a garden on the side of a hill before. My last garden in North Carolina, I didn't have, it was kind of like slightly sloped. It wasn't drastic, but it was slightly sloped, and it was sloped enough that it probably wasn't the most ideal planting environment, and I didn't do enough to level out that soil and that space before I put in-ground beds in that space. And I had a lot, I mean, it worked. I was able to add some amendments, and I was able to, plant in it successfully. But again, really back to watering. I dealt with a lot of drainage issues. I dealt with a lot of runoff. I was dealing with some erosion issues. All the amendments in soil I was putting in the garden were just slowly sliding down the hill. So make sure the area that you're growing in is level if you can help it. If it's not level, maybe again doing some type of, there's ways to do like a terrace garden and things like that. That's a lot of work, to be honest with you. Building retention walls and things. Like I looked into some of that whenever I was in North Carolina, just because, like I said, of the issues that I was dealing with. But what's really probably best is if you can find a very flat spot. Now, if it's slightly elevated or you worry about it, again, going with raised beds. Raised beds can be very helpful. My garden in North Carolina, my backyard, the areas where it sloped down, I put a raised bed in that space and grew successfully, and it was great. I didn't have the same issues in the raised bed that I had growing in ground. So again, find a space that's flat and leave me a comment down below. Let me know if you face any of these obstacles or challenges that I'm talking about in your gardening space. Is it just me, or is anybody else challenged with growing on the side of a hill? Another important thing to consider when planning your garden space, when designing your garden, is going to be the protection it might have from wind. So, and this can be something we don't think about a lot, but especially if you're in a location or an area that gets a lot of wind, that can be detrimental to your soil and also to your plants if it's too much. Now, light breeze, they're going to benefit from. One of the reasons why I chose the location that I'm in, well, one, it's probably the only sunny location in my small backyard, and it's just the only location that makes sense. But also, when I was looking at the garden space and designing my layout, I took note of the wind protection. So this is right next to my house. There's some wind protection from that. I have a south-facing shed that provides a little bit of wind protection. I've got some trees on either side of my garden, and I've got a fence from my neighbor's yard. All of this creates a different microclimate than what I would have in my front yard. And this microclimate is a little bit protected from wind just because of all of those elements I just described. So kind of taking note of what's around. Can you plant in a space that offers some wind protection? Are there structures near it? Can you plant in a space that might be a slightly different microclimate where it heats up a little bit quicker in the spring, or maybe stays warm a little bit longer into the fall to kind of extend your growing season? And I have other videos that are going to dive a little bit deeper into microclimates and things like that. But basically just kind of keeping an eye of what happens in that space. And structures near your garden will help provide a little bit of wind protection and also can increase the temperature of that space, like I said, to be able to plant your plants a little bit earlier in the spring or let them last a little bit longer into the fall, just because that area stays a little bit warmer. Another important point when it comes to planning your garden space that a lot of people overlook is making it really accessible. We might think, okay, I'm going to plant my garden far away from my house. It's kind of over there, out of the way. Okay, but here's the problem. You're never going to go over there, out of the way. So plant your garden in a space that you're likely to visit in order to take care of it. Gardening is a lot of work, and especially in the heat of the summer, it can be exhausting, and you can just not feel like going out there and watering your plants. It's 90 degrees, it's the middle of July, right? But if you plant it in a space that you're likely to visit or that's close to your house, you're going to visit that space a lot more often. You're going to take better care of your plants. You're going to notice when things aren't going right. You're going to notice when pests have invaded your garden because it's a space that you look at often. So plant it really close to your house, plant it in a space that's very accessible to you, and plant it in a space that you enjoy being in. Another sub point on making it accessible is make it accessible to your water hose. Do you have a water source nearby that you can use to water your garden? I promise you, you are going to have to water your garden. And I promise you, if you are lugging out watering cans to water 5 beds like I have here, that's going to get very old very fast. So whether it's having drip irrigation installed into your garden bed already so that you don't have to even think about watering, you have it on a timer, or whether it's just placing it near a water hose that you can run out, grab the water hose, and water your garden fairly quickly. All of that's just going to make your life a lot easier. And if you put your garden in a space that's not accessible to water, again, you're less likely to water it in the heat of the summer. It's also just going to take more of your time. Gardening should be fun. It should be something we enjoy, but it also does take a lot of time. So we want to do all the things that we can to make the experience more enjoyable, make it a little bit less work and a little bit less frustrating for us. So plant it near a water source. Another important tip that I learned from doing it the hard way and wrong from the start is make everything uniform. So I have uniform beds here. Now, I do have different size beds. I'm not saying we can't have different sizes, but having some structure and some uniform to your beds is going to be really important. If you're growing in ground, even make those, uniform. I would keep your beds at no more than maybe 4 feet wide. Your planting space no more than maybe 4 feet wide. That way you can reach in on either side. You can have some variations if you like that in the sizing of it, but I would have a plan. I would have a structure. I would have it uniform. In North Carolina, I went outside and decided I was going to garden, and I just dug up my whole backyard without much of a plan. Now, I tried to have some structure to my beds. I dug 3 to begin with, but they were really lopsided. None of them were measured very well. Like, I took a measuring tape out there. I tried, but I did not do a very good job, and I wanted to just get planting quickly. Okay, well, that's great, but I wound up having to go back later and fix it because I got really tired of looking at it. So I would say make your beds uniform. Also your paths. That's really important. If you're going to have, let's say, grass growing in between your beds, you want to have enough space for the lawnmower to get in between there. Another mistake I've made in the past, not making enough space for a lawnmower to get through. If you're going to mulch your pathways, you might be able to put your paths a little bit closer. But as a general rule, I keep my paths 2 to 3 feet apart. I try to do about 3 feet. I think that's what I have right here right now. But I never go less than 2 feet. I know some people that will say, oh, you can do 12-inch or 18-inch spacing for your pathways. To be honest with you, I found that I need a pathway big enough for me to sit in or be in without running into the next bed or running into other plants for me to be able to work in my garden. And so to do that, I keep my paths at least 2 feet wide, but I prefer 3 feet wide. And the last tip when it comes to choosing your garden location and designing it is make it pretty. Make it a space you want to be in. Think about flowers when you're thinking about the varieties you're going to put in. Think about mulching it and putting maybe some pretty pots, adding a border. Whatever it is that excites you, whatever it is that you look at and you say, I love that, that's so pretty, that sparks joy inside of me. Make your garden a place that sparks joy inside of you. Make it a place that you want to hang out. Make it a place that you want to be. Make it a place that even if you're not actively outside working the soil or planting something, you can grab a cup of tea and go sit in it and go, make it that type of space, because we're not just growing our garden to get food out of it. Hopefully we're harvesting joy as well. Thank you guys so much for watching today. Leave me some comments down below. Let me know how you're planning your garden. I hope this video was helpful. I hope you got a lot of value out of it. I'm gonna leave a video on your screen for you to check out until the next one comes out. Again, thank you guys so much for watching. May your garden be filled with grace and may you be abundantly blessed. We'll see you next time. Bye.